What's going on, guys? If you saw the last video, you'll know that I went to Midwest Banger 5 a couple weeks ago, and the car ran awesome on Saturday, but then Sunday, the first lap out, we went off track, smashed the radiator, and caused a bunch of other problems. So today we're going to fix them. I'm not really in a hurry to get the car fixed, as that was the last event of the year. I'm not doing it anymore until next year, but it's driving me crazy not knowing what this electrical issue is. And I'm hoping it's something simple, since when I took it off the trailer, I measured battery voltage and was only getting about 8 volts. That's a pretty clear sign that either the battery or the alternator is not working. So we're gonna do some simple electrical tests and see if we can figure out the problem. So the first thing you pretty much always want to do is test the battery voltage. That'll give you a lot of information on what might possibly be wrong. So you simply put a voltmeter across the battery. You should normally have 12 volts-ish, 12.3 normally, with the car not running. And you should have over 14, preferably like 14.7 with the car running and the alternator working. Now, they typically say that if the battery voltage with the car not running is less than 10 volts, it's probably a bad battery. But just to be safe, I want to test the alternator. Testing the alternator is free, whereas buying a new battery when I don't necessarily need one would cost, $100 or more. So we're going to test the alternator real quick, because I know that with the car off, I was getting about 8 volts, and with it on, I was getting the exact same voltage. It was not changing, which tells me that the alternator is probably not working. So the alternator is pretty simple. You've got 3 wires. You have S for sensor, L for light, and IG for ignition power. So basically, ignition power is pretty straightforward. It goes to a fuse that is turned on from the ignition. The light is simply an output to a dash light to tell you if there's a problem with the alternator circuit. And then the sensor wire measures the battery voltage to tell the alternator essentially what the battery voltage is and how much it needs to put out to keep the battery charged, in a nutshell. So like I said, it's got 3 pins. You can see right there that 1 is going to be on the left, and then you have 2 and 3. And 1 is the light, 2 is ignition power, and 3 is sense. So you could assume in theory that if I have an issue with the alternator, that light wire should have power on it, and the other wires I'm guessing won't have power, because that's probably the issue, but we'll take a meter and stick them on there and see what happens. Light wire, the middle one will be the ignition power, and the far right will be sensor. So I was actually wrong. The sensor wire should have voltage all the time because it's got a straight connection to the battery, which mine does. So the middle wire should have power when we turn the ignition on. So I'm going to turn the ignition on and we'll see if we've got power on that one. And we do not have power. So I'm going to guess most likely we either have a wiring issue or a blown fuse. I'm going to start with fuses because that's the easier thing to check. Even though I did look at the fuses at the track, sometimes fuses do blow and you can't tell by looking at it. You've got to put a meter across them to determine if they're blown or not. So I'm going to pull out the fuse for that and we'll see what it looks like. All right, so the fuse did not look like it was blown, but it definitely was. So I guess that's cool. It was a super easy fix. That is a little sad that I packed up early and went home in the middle of the day when I could have kept driving if I had just checked the fuses more thoroughly. But you live and you learn. It is what it is. So now we've got voltage, even though it is pretty low due to the battery being drained. But now we'll start the car up and test the battery and see if we're getting 14 volts or more than 14 volts like we should be if the alternator's working. Alright, so now we have 14.2 volts, so it's definitely charging. The alternator is definitely working. So we got the main issue fixed. Like I said, it was definitely a bummer that just a fuse kept me from driving more on Sunday, but it is what it is. So now that that's fixed, it's almost winter here in Iowa. It's getting cold, and I only have water in the radiator right now with a little bit of water wetter. So I need to drain it out and get antifreeze in the block so it doesn't freeze. And I also just want to get the radiator pulled out since it has a hole in it. It is still slightly leaking even after I fixed it with JB Weld. So we're going to get that pulled out in preparation for putting a new one in. But before we do that, we're going to run some antifreeze through it and get some of the water out. So since this radiator does not have a drain on it, and as far as I know, the block does not have a coolant drain on it either, I'm just going to disconnect the lower radiator hose and start the engine and let it pump out as much water as it can. Then we'll put it back together, put some antifreeze in it, let it warm up and cycle antifreeze through the whole system, and then we should be good. All right, so I know we didn't get all of the water out, draining it that way, but it should be more than enough that we can top it off with coolant now and get it so that it won't freeze in the winter. All right, so now that I got some antifreeze cycled through the engine, I'm going to disconnect it again so we can pull off the front end and get the radiator out and show you all the damage. Okay, so we got the radiator out. And upon first look, you can tell it's extremely twisted. Let me see if I can show you guys. If you look straight down at it, and then of course the main problem, the big hole in it. So because everything bent, the fan motor ended up coming in contact with the radiator, which just tore the crap out of it. So as you can see, I tried fixing it with some JB Weld at the track, and it kind of worked. It still had a little bit of a drip, but at least I would have been able to get some laps out of it. Because I run just water, it's not a big deal if it drips a little bit on the track. It's just going to evaporate and won't cause any slick spots. So I still could have got a few laps out of it, but then I had the electrical issues, so it was game over. So now that the radiator's out, I'm going to order a new one. Once that comes in, we can throw it all back together and probably build some kind of tube structure around it, just a simple square tube, so that it's a little bit more protected in the future. But for now, that's going to do it for this video. I'm probably not going to be working on this car anytime soon. We're going to pack it away for the winter and hit some other projects. We've got a new car coming and a bunch of fabrication stuff that I'm going to be doing this winter, as well as upgrading the shop. So make sure you stay tuned for that. Once I'm done with all of those, we're going to be focusing on making this car look pretty. So don't miss out. Thank you guys for all the support, and we'll see you next time.